Today I'm going to show you how I make the original potato flake sourdough bread loaves. This is the recipe that has been passed down from lots of different people. So many people that have this potato flake starter use this same recipe. I'm just going to show you how I make it today. The first thing you start with is 6 cups of bread flour. If you don't have bread flour, you can use all-purpose. It will have a little bit of a different texture and may not be as fluffy because bread flour has a higher protein content. I will say that I have tried using a combination of bread flour and all-purpose, and that works out really well too, just using about 4 cups bread flour, 2 cups all-purpose. And when you're measuring your flour, I like to scoop it directly, and so it's kind of packed in the measuring cup, and I don't level it off with the back of a knife. I just kind of shake it level. So sometimes that will make it a little bit more than 6 cups, and you just kind of have to adjust your flour after you have mixed up to see if you need a little bit more. Next, you're going to add 1 cup of potato flake starter, half a cup of sugar, 1 tablespoon of salt, a half a cup of oil, and 1.5 cups of warm water. A couple things I wanted to mention about that is with your potato flake starter, most of the time you want to start with an active starter, which means it has been fed in the last 24 hours. You don't want to use it too soon because then it wouldn't have had time to feed on what you have fed it, but also the longer you wait, the less active it is going to become. The starter that I use today actually has been sitting out for probably 3 or 4 days without being fed, which means it's not going to be as active. And you'll see later on in the video, I mention that it does take it quite a bit longer for it to rise. Typically, you will see it rise in about 8 hours, 8 to 10 hours, but these loaves took double the amount of time. I wanted to show you today how to make it by hand with a spoon and a bowl, something that everybody has. You definitely can make this in a stand mixer. I make it in a stand mixer every single time except for right now, and if I have already got my stand mixer bowl being used for something else, I'll just whip it up in a regular bowl. It is a little bit more elbow grease to get it done. I will mix it up with the spoon first until it is mostly incorporated, till it's getting to the point where it's too hard to mix with the spoon. And then I will finish incorporating the flour by hand. At this point, it seems like there is way too much flour, and you would think, oh, hey, I need to add some more water. But just be patient and wait until you have kneaded the dough for at least 5 minutes before you make a decision on adding in any more liquid. Because if you have too much liquid, your dough is going to be more dense, which seems to be contradictory, but whenever you have too much liquid, it's going to make the bread heavier and it's not going to be able to rise. But whenever you have enough flour in there, it is actually going to help your dough rise and look nice and beautiful. Just knead it until you get all of the flour incorporated. Sometimes it helps to kind of spread apart the dough to expose the inside part of the dough that's a little bit more sticky, and use that to grab up some of the flour that's in the bowl. You should be able to get all of the flour incorporated, and if you are absolutely not able to get the flour incorporated, then I would add maybe 1 tablespoon of water at a time, no more than that. This is also a great time to assess to see if you actually need to add more flour. So if your dough is way too sticky to the point that you can hardly handle your dough, then you probably are going to need to add more flour. Right now, my dough is at the perfect consistency. It's just a tad sticky, a little bit is sticking to my hands, but not so much that I can't handle the dough. I'm going to need it just a little bit more to get it into a nice ball shape. Then I'm going to oil this with a little bit of olive oil, which I meant to mention. The recipe on my blog at littletennesseehome.com calls for canola oil, vegetable oil, This I've started using olive oil instead just because it's a healthier option. I did have a little bit of canola oil left to use up, and so I used some of that, and then the rest is olive oil. All of those work well. I've even used coconut oil. You want to oil your dough just enough so that it doesn't stick, then cover it with plastic wrap. I do not use a wet tea towel because the top of the dough will dry out. If you want a more natural option, I would definitely go the beeswax wrap route. Since I just finished up with making the dough, I'm going to go ahead and feed my starter because I only had maybe half a cup of starter left after making this recipe. So whenever I feed my starter, I do 1 cup of warm water, 3/4 a cup of sugar. I stir that and try to get the sugar to dissolve some. And then I add 3 tablespoons of potato flakes, and I also stir those in, try to get those incorporated well. I do all this in a separate measuring cup and then mix it in to my mother jar. Once it's in there, mix it up just a little bit, cover it with a cloth and a rubber band to keep any bugs out. I used to use a lid and just loosely cover it, and this worked well for me for a while, but I noticed my starter was getting a little bit less active, and that could have been just a coincidence with some other factor, but I tried putting a cloth over it instead of a lid, and that was working well, so I've just continued to do that. I might go back to my lid jar at some point, but right now this is working well for me. This is the next day, and I am going to oil my pans. Now this recipe calls for making 3 loaves of bread, and depending on your pan size, it could be 3 or it could be 2, and it also depends on how large you want your loaves. So these are 9x5 pans. I have many different size bread pans. I have a stone pan. I have one of the pans that had the lid on the top. I took my dough, dumped it out. It had about doubled at this point. I want to talk about how important it is that you don't let the dough over ferment on the first rise, because if you do, your second rise is going to have a lot more trouble and it may not rise to double, and you're going to result in a smaller, denser loaf because it will have lost its strength using all of its rising power during the first rise. So I'm shaping my loaf. I like to just dump it straight out of the bowl, cut it in whatever portions that I'm going to use, and then press out some of the air and then kind of tuck and roll it into a shape that looks like a loaf that's going to fit in the pan that I'm using. With this one, I end up taking it out later and reshaping it because I felt like the top was not smooth enough. I forgot to do it with my first loaf, was to press the air out of the dough before I started shaping it. With this one, I fold the 2 edges over and start to roll the dough and kind of tuck as I'm rolling. This one turned out a lot better. You might notice that I'm not using any flour on my surface or on my hands or sprinkled on the dough. That is something that I try to avoid if at all possible. There are some recipes that you just have to use a little bit of added flour, but that flour that you add to the dough once it has already risen will not be fermented like the rest of the flours in the dough. And that is one thing that I really love about sourdough, is having the added benefits of the fermented grains so that it's a bit easier to digest. So I take it out and I'm going to tuck and roll. You don't want to pull so tight that you rip the top, but you do want to pull it tight, pinch the seams on the bottom. Sometimes I'll use like a stitching type method to keep it together, then place it back in a oiled pan. I also will use parchment paper a lot to help prevent it sticking, but for today's video, I didn't want the parchment paper getting in the way, so I just sprayed the pans. Then I reuse my plastic wrap that was on top of the bowl because I had 2 pieces, so I take those apart, put them on top. You want to loosely cover them so that they can rise and don't get trapped in the dish. The trick is in the summer with a lot of bugs, you don't want them getting in to under the plastic wrap, so I like to place mine in my oven that is off. I don't turn the light on usually because it can get too hot. It's been well over 12 hours later, probably closer to 20 if I had to guess. And they have doubled in size. They're a little bit above the top of the pan, and that's kind of what I'm looking for. But I was actually kind of shocked at how well these rose once they got in the oven. You remove the plastic wrap, pop them in a 350-degree oven. Look how beautiful these are. These loaves are just looking so great. So I cook them for about 35 minutes. Hey guys, I just wanted to take a break for just a minute and let you know about this app that I have been using for about 4 years now, and it is an app called Plan to Eat, and it is a meal planning app that you can have on your phone. You can use it on your computer. What I love most about using this app is keeping all of my recipes in one place, but also being able to make my grocery list so easily. Whatever meals that I might be planning for that week, you just add them to your meal plan and it will create a shopping list for you. You can delete the ones off of there of things that you already have, like salt or oil or something that you just keep on hand, but all of the rest of the stuff that you will need for all of the recipes is going to be on your list. And that way you don't start making something and then realize that you forgot a certain ingredient that you need for that recipe. It might sound like adding a bunch of recipes to an app is going to be super tedious, but it's actually just as easy as clicking a button. You go to the webpage that you like the recipe from, click the Add to My Plan to Eat button that you download to your browser, or just copy the URL and import it directly into Plan to Eat. You don't have to edit anything unless you just want to. It will already be in there for you, and it'll be so easy for you to find it next time. To be able to have all of my recipes already added and to get 20% off of your first year subscription to this app, you can use my link. It is bit.ly/LTH, which stands for Little Tennessee Home, LTH Plan to Eat. You can also scan this code or check the link in the description box below. If you want to know a whole lot more about this Plan to Eat app, I have a video that goes into great detail on how to set up an account or add recipes, and I will post the link to that video also in the description box below. Whenever you pull them out, you want to obviously be really careful taking them out of the oven. Whenever you tap them, you want to be able to hear a sound almost like they're hollow. Now, you'll be kind of alarmed that the top of the bread is very hard and you don't want such a crusty bread loaf. I like to spread mine with just a little bit of butter. This is totally optional, and I don't think that I mention it in my recipe on my blog, but it is something that I like to do every now and then. But the key to having the soft top is covering with a tea towel while it's cooling, and let it sit there for a little while, probably at least an hour, if not longer, until you can touch the bread and the pans without burning yourself. Once you take the tea towel off, you will notice that the top kind of is a little bit wrinkly, but that's exactly what you're looking for. I like to use it's called a fish spatula. It's a plastic one and is the perfect thinness and flexibility to get my loaves out of my pan and make sure that they all come out in one piece. Even though I oil the pan, they still like to stick just a little bit, which is why I typically use parchment paper. I get the loaves out of the pan and they are nice and soft, and you can tell how fluffy they are just by the way that they feel in your hand. One of my loaves is bigger than the other, and that's just because one of the pieces of dough was larger than the other, and that's because I didn't weigh it. I just eyeballed it. If you are particular or you want very uniform sized loaves, you can weigh out your dough first, divide that by how many loaves you're going to make, and then you'll know exactly how much each piece of dough needs to weigh to have uniform loaves. So you can see how soft this loaf is. You can bend the bread and it's not crumbling like a piece of dry bread would. If you have any trouble making your loaf of bread, there is a potato flake sourdough troubleshooting post over on my blog at Little Tennessee Home, and I will link that in the description below, along with the directions and printable recipe for this exact loaf that I made today. And remember, it does say that it makes 3 loaves, but it just depends on the size of your pan and if you want larger loaves or smaller loaves. If you don't want to make all 3 loaves, you can use my recipe toward the bottom of that post. I have a conversion for just a 1 loaf, and that will make it super easy for you to make it if you have a small family or you just don't need that much bread. I like to put mine in bread bags. You can get them on Amazon. I found these at Walmart, but I have ordered them off Amazon before, and I can post the link of those below. Thank you so much for watching today. I hope this was helpful for you. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, and I will be making more videos about potato flake sourdough and more homemaking videos, so just stick around and check it out. See you again soon.